All right, folks, as we begin our journey into fantasy sci-fi lit, our first unit of the course is origins. Now, it is hard to pinpoint the origin of either fantasy and sci-fi. And although fantasy and sci-fi can be defined as two distinct genres, we in our course are not going to be distinguishing between the two because there is so much overlap, and what is fantasy can be sci-fi, what is sci-fi can be fantastic. So beyond the first week of the course, we're really looking at fantasy and sci-fi as a whole. However, to establish the origins, we can look at two distinct sort of through lines for fantasy and sci-fi. So for science fiction, there is debate about who invented science fiction, but I will say from my perspective, and I think from the most rational perspective, that is Mary Shelley with her watershed novel, Frankenstein. Now, Frankenstein was published in 1818, and it was written in this really interesting context where Mary Shelley, who is the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women, was an early sort of proto-feminist, and was married to Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was a very famous poet at the time. They went up into the Alps for the summer with Lord Byron, who was another very famous poet at the time. And while they were up in the Alps for the summer, Mount Tambora erupted. Mount Tambora was, for reference, Mount St. Helens was like a Cat 5. Mount Tambora was a Cat 7. So it was a huge volcanic eruption. And it actually put other parts of the world into a very, a wintry summer. It's the summer of 1818 is famous for this. And so she was stuck up in the Alps with Percy Bysshe Shelley, Lord Byron, and Lord Byron's mistress. And this is where she wrote Frankenstein when she was 19 and 20 years old. Invented the genre as we know it. Now, Frankenstein is, of course, a full-length novel. Frankenstein is, of course, as I mentioned, a full-length novel, but because of the limitations of our course in the scope of the 8 weeks, we don't have time to read the full novel. But we don't actually need to read the full novel for you to get out of it what we need for the course. So what we're looking at in Frankenstein is not the specific storytelling of the written text on the page. We're looking for the broader concepts that Frankenstein establishes that lead us into the science fiction genre as a whole. So Frankenstein establishes this concept of otherness, this idea of an other that is somewhat human in an uncanny sort of way, but also very not human, very other from us in a certain sort of way, and sort of plays with our ideas of sympathy and human connection to that other. And this becomes a foundational idea in science fiction and in fantasy. The idea of the robot, or the alien, or the AI, or the monster, or the whatever, as something that we can empathize with, but also are fearful of, but also maybe more human than us. That is essentially what a number of different sci-fi tropes are based on. So that's what we're looking at here. Now, rather than have you read the whole of the novel or a bunch of excerpts from the novel, you're going to read a couple of short pieces just so that you can get a taste of what Frankenstein as a whole reads like. And then you will watch a summary video that gives you an idea of the whole scope of the novel. If you've ever heard the Hollywood version of Frankenstein, that's not the real Frankenstein. And so you're going to get the summary version, and then you're also going to watch a video from Monstrum, Dr. Emily Harka, who is a great scholar who is going to talk about the cultural context and concepts. So both of those are very useful to you. Now, as your sort of preview information into Frankenstein, this is what I will give you as to not step on the toes of your other video content later on. In English literature, we have a saying. That saying is that intelligence is knowing that Frankenstein isn't the monster, but wisdom is knowing that Frankenstein is. So let me unpack that for you right quick. Intelligence is knowing that Frankenstein is not the name of what you think of when you think of monster. Dr. Frankenstein is the name of the scientist. The monster is just referred to as the creature. So intelligence is having the book smarts to know the difference between Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. However, wisdom is knowing that Dr. Frankenstein, the scientist, is the monster in this story. Arguably, Dr. Frankenstein is the most monstrous entity in this story. He's the most inhumane. of any character in this story. And these videos and excerpts that you're going to read here in just a bit are going to unpack why that is. As you're reading, make sure you're adding comments about anything that you find notable. And I look forward to seeing what you all have to say about the OG sci-fi Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.